Thanks very much for coming. Thanks to Jeff. You guys don't know that, but Jeff was actually one of my main inspirations when I became a freelance writer. He was actually one of the first writers I knew who actually wrote for a living, and he's a wonderful writer. And without further delay, if we could turn the lights out. As almost everyone knows, Everest was first climbed 44 years ago, just a few days ago. In 1953 by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. That was a year before I was born, so I missed it. But 10 years later, an event I remember well. In 1963, Americans climbed Everest for the first time. And this was a huge event all across America. I mean, it was in the cover of Life magazine and National Geographic, and it made a huge impact on me. These Americans climbed the mountain 3 times on that expedition, and one of the ascents was the first ascent of the West Ridge, which at the time was one of the hardest climbs ever done in the history of mountaineering, and is still considered one of the great ascents of all time, perhaps one of the 5 greatest ascents of all time. The 2 guys who made that climb were Willie Unsold, who was a professor of theology from Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, which was my hometown, and Tom Hornbein, who was a doctor from St. Louis. And when they got back, Hornbein wrote this book, Everest, the West Ridge. It's one of the classics of mountaineering literature. It's a much better book than my book, and anyone who hasn't read it, I would urge you to. It's still in print by the Mountaineers. I bet the Boulder bookstore has a copy or could get you a copy. This is a copy I bought, probably the second copy I bought when I was a teenager. It cost $3.95 back then. Books were cheaper. It's all dog-eared and coffee stained because I've read it more than a dozen times. It made a huge impact on me. One of the reasons it had made such an impact was Unsold, the guy who made one of the guys who made the first ascent of that climb, was a close friend of my father's, and I grew up with his kids, Debbie and Regan, are a year older and a year younger than me. And my father taught me to climb when I was 8 years old in the Cascade Range of Oregon. The first summit I ever reached was with my father and Unsold and his son Regan. So that's where the seeds of my dream to climb Everest began, when I was 9 years old. And it was, as I say, it really lodged hard in my imagination. Now, my father, there's 5 kids in my family. You can see my siblings. This is my brother, Andrew, affectionately known as Porco, who's here tonight with his wife and daughter, by the way. And my father taught all of us to climb. But for some reason, my siblings liked it well enough, but it never really got under their skin like it did mine. And they went on to lead normal, productive lives. And I grew up to be a climber. This is a picture taken when I think I was 20. This is 1974. By this point, climbing was all I cared about. I mean, everything else was a distant second. And that same year that this picture was taken, in '74, I went to Alaska for the first time. And this is what really pushed me over the edge as far as climbing went. This is where I went. This is the Arrogetch Peaks in the high Arctic. It's what's now Gates of the Arctic National Park, but then in '74 there was no national park. Hadn't been created yet. It was just wilderness. And I was amazed and dumbstruck to realize that Alaska is full of beautiful unclimbed mountains like this. Almost every mountain in this picture, with the exception of that one, hadn't been climbed. And a friend, Bill Bullard, and I made the first ascent of this mountain. It's officially known as 7190. The climbers call it Xanadu. And the route begins, there's a lower part of the face you can't see, then across these ledges, and it climbs this skyline ridge. Now, I'd been climbing since I was 12 years when I did this, but most of that climb had been on easy volcanoes in the west, and I'd only been rock climbing for 2 years, so I wasn't a good climber. For those of you who are climbers, when I went to Alaska, I could only climb 5'8", 5'9" on a good day, which goes to show you that you don't have to be a great climber to have cool adventures. You just sort of have to have the desire and imagination. This route is no harder than 5'8", if that, but it's beautiful. This mountain's never been climbed since in those, 25 years, 23 years. So. This is the summit of that mountain, Xanadu, 2 in the morning. It's the Arctic, so in the summer the sun never sets. It just circles the horizon and you get this amazing light. It's like a narcotic. And I remember this moment vividly. It was as happy as I'd ever been in my life. After this, there was nothing, climbing was everything. There was no going back. I mean, nothing could touch this. So I came back to the lower 48 and I worked hard on my rock climbing. I decided to try to become as good as I could get at rock climbing. In the mid-'70s, when I lived in Boulder, I lived here for 4 years, from '76 until '80. I taught myself to ice climb. This is on the designator, rigid designator in Vail, probably in '77. And this was, those of you who were around then, this was a real exciting time to be an ice climber because, you know, Yvon Chouinard, the guy who owns Patagonia now, had just not that many years earlier revolutionized the sport by putting a curve in the ice axe, and so everything was wide open. People, you know, Jeff Lowe had just climbed Bridalveil Falls for the first time, he and Weiss 2 years earlier. So people were just learning how to do vertical and overhanging ice. So it was an exciting time to be ice climbing. Every chance I went to Canada. This is my friend Pam Brown, who lives in Boulder now, on the summit of, I think, Pigeon Spire in the Bugaboos in British Columbia. Better yet, I went to Alaska every summer that I could. This is '75. This is the Alaska Range. Mount McKinley, Denali, the highest mountain in the continent. This is a ridge of Denali. It rises off the picture there. This is Mount Huntington, Mount Dickey. We're on the summit of a mountain. This is my friend Tom Davies on the summit of a mountain we christened Mount Cosmic Debris. We just made the first ascent. No one's heard of it or cares about it, but it was a good climb. In '76, I moved to Boulder, and because of the climbing. And I met a guy in the Aristocrat restaurant who gave me a job as a carpenter. And there was no tables empty, and he had a spot, so I sat down, and by the end of breakfast, he talked me into spending $300 on tools, and he gave me a job. And for the next 8 years, I was a carpenter. And it was a good job for a climber because I could build a house down in Broomfield or later here in Boulder. And it'd take about 3 months, and then I could earn enough money to climb for 4 or 5 months, and I'd build another house. And you know, I worked for Mike Kinsing here in Boulder. I worked for Markel Holmes. Some of my guys I work with are still here. In '77, when I was living in Boulder, I was living in a construction trailer down on Spruce Street when I was building the Spruce Street townhouses. I got it into my head to attempt this mountain. This is the Devil's Thumb on the border between southeast Alaska and British Columbia. This is the northwest face of the Devil's Thumb. That's 6,000 vertical feet. That's twice the height of El Cap in Yosemite. It had never been climbed. It's still never been climbed. It's been attempted a lot. Mike Biarzi here in Boulder has attempted this. He's sort of this is his wall, and he's tried it before, and if it ever gets climbed, he's going to be the guy who tries it. Just last month, in April, it was attempted by Alex Lowe, who was probably the best climber in the world right now, and Randy Ratcliffe, who's another superb climber from Jackson, New Hampshire. Randy, in addition to being a great climber, is the guy who made those woodcuts in my book, and Into Thin Air. I think they're amazing woodcuts, and he's a remarkable artist. But I decided not to attempt this face. I was going to attempt this rib, a considerably easier route. And for reasons that seemed very clear at the time, but are no longer clear, I decided to do this alone. So in the spring of '77, I drove my Pontiac Star Chief, $100 Pontiac, from Boulder to the Seattle area, Puget Sound. I left it by the side of the road, and I hitched north on this boat. This is the Ocean Queen, a 58-foot salmon seiner. Just took turns at the wheel, and they gave me a free ride. 3 days later, they dropped me off in Petersburg, Alaska, a little fishing village. From saltwater, I skied up this glacier alone, 30 miles up to the horizon. That's this Dakine ice cap, big ice sheet. And there I was at the base of the thumb. Now the Devil's Thumb it's bad weather in this part of Alaska most of the time, which means the wall's plastered with ice, which is what allows you to climb it. But you have to pick your days to climb, and I hadn't been there long before I got a clear day. So I went for it, started to climb. It's hard to tell what's going on in this picture, but this is vertical ice right to the left of that rib I showed you. I'm hanging off one axe and shooting down between my legs with the camera. This is my left boot. This is the rope hanging down into space that I carried to rappel down with. I didn't belay, I just third-classed it because that was good ice. It was soft and thick here. And it was actually quite reasonable. I felt good on this, but 500 or 600 feet higher, the ice got thin and weird and funky, and I got frightened. It turned into rime, and I came down. I tried it again a few days later in a slightly different place, didn't even get as high, came down again. But I really wanted to climb this peak because it's a beautiful mountain any way you get to the top. So I skied around to the other side, the southeast face, which is this side. And on a nice afternoon, again, I waited for the weather, and I climbed halfway up, and I pitched my tent right here on this promontory, which is a spectacular place to camp. I had to stop there because the ice, it was afternoon, and it was the sunny side of the mountain, so the ice was getting soft and coming down. So I waited. I spent the night there. Next morning, I got up at dawn, and the climbing was much easier on this side. It's not as steep, and it's south-facing, so it freezes and thaws, and the ice is really good here. So I didn't even carry a rope this attempt. I just third-classed up these, connected these ice patches. And in very short order, I didn't have a watch, but it must have only been a couple hours because it was easy. I got to the summit. And I knew my buddies back here in Boulder would never believe I actually climbed the thumb if I didn't take this picture. This is the actual summit. It's a very narrow ridge, and it's sort of scary the last little bit. But this is the summit. Now, this, by the way, is Mount Burkett, another beautiful mountain in the Stikine, hardly ever been climbed. This is Burkett Needle, which is the cover of Climbing Magazine this month. And it's a wonderful climb. Some friends of mine climbed that face just a couple years ago. So after I took this picture, I turned around and I down climbed because I didn't have a rope. Got back to my skis, skied back to the ocean, and after a day or two, a boat came by and I flagged it down and I went home. Now, in many ways, this was the start of my writing career. These climbs, I'd never studied writing, and I was a very bad student. I barely graduated from college. I barely graduated from high school. I actually didn't really graduate from high school. And, but Climbing Magazine started asking me to write about them, and this was actually the first article I ever got paid for. A magazine called Mountain, that's now defunct, unfortunately. It's kind of a cool magazine. Paid me 35 pounds, about 70 bucks. And I was off and running, and I was so excited. I mean, I don't think I've ever been more excited on any check I've gotten since, except for since I got this. Now, I'd had some real close scrapes on the thumb. I mean, I'd almost gotten killed a couple times, 3, 4 times, and over the next few years, I'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat thinking about that. And I looked around at my friends who went to college with, and they were becoming lawyers and doctors and having families and buying furniture and stuff, and I was living in a construction trailer on Spruce Street, so I decided it was time to get serious about life, and I decided to quit climbing. In 1980, I took a job on the boat that gave me a ride to Alaskan, 77, the Ocean Queen, on the back deck. It was good money. I was going to make a steak and get on with life. And that summer, my girlfriend at the time, Linda Moore, came up on the boat. This is her on the Ocean Queen. And it was a romantic thing to do, and we got along. And when I told her I was going to quit climbing and get serious about life, she agreed to marry me. This was a big factor in her decision to marry me. Unfortunately, I didn't appreciate the pull the mountains had on me. Places like this, Patagonia. This is, Fitzroy down in Patagonia. And so I started climbing again. I make light of it, but it was actually, as many of you know who climb, it's not easy to have a partner who doesn't climb if you do. But we've been married now almost 17 years, so we've worked it out. It's still an issue. But the thing that really, we almost got divorced over this climb. This is in 1984. I went to the north face of the Argyll with Mark Twight, who lives here in town. He's a friend of mine. This is Mark at the end of the Hinterstoicer Traverse coming up after me. And this climb almost cost me my marriage. We didn't get up the climb, but my marriage held on. And after that, I started writing full time. Actually, just before that, in '83. And I was inspired by, I knew a couple writers. Jeff Long and Dave Roberts were doing this. Jim Baylog was doing this as a photographer. He lives in town. This is a Boulder connection because Jeff lives here, Jim lives here. Dave Roberts, pictured here, who was my main mentor, grew up in Boulder. His mother and sister are here in the audience tonight. His mother had a lot to do with the creation of this library. So David became my friend and mentor, and he convinced me you could make a living at writing. So I started writing full time in '83. And now I was getting paid to do stuff like climb the Salafay on El Cap. I thought I'd gone to heaven. Outside Magazine said, this is where I want to do. I got to climb with some of my heroes. This is Yvon Chouinard, the father of ice climbing in a certain sense. And Chouinard's never going to climb with the likes of me unless I'm writing about him. But I got to climb with him because I was writing about him. This is in Highlight Canyon up in Bozeman. In 1984, one of the best assignments I ever got was I went to what was then East Germany, Dresden, East Germany. Here, these amazing sandstone towers. And I went with this guy. This is Fritz Wiesner. Fritz is one of the great climbers of all time. Reinhold Messner, if you ask him who are his heroes, who are his role models, Fritz is first on the list. Fritz and Walter Bonatti. Fritz passed the torch from Wiesner to Bonatti to Messner. And this is Wiesner. He's a legend. When he took me to Dresden, he was 84 years old. In this photo, he's 84. He could climb as good or better than me at the age of 84, and I was 30. He's a real inspiration to me. He died 2 years later, sadly, but I was honored that I got to climb with him, and I never would have if I wasn't a writer. I was writing full time now. I couldn't make a living just writing about climbing the outdoors, so half the stuff I wrote was about art or political science or whatever, culture for Smithsonian or Rolling Stone, whoever would pay me. But the outdoor stuff was always the nearest and dearest to my heart. And no article has affected me more than the one I wrote about this kid. This is Chris McCandless. I wrote a book about him later, Into the Wild. And McCandless grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. He was every parent's dream kid, a brilliant student, a gifted athlete. He was real idealistic, though, and real kind of cocky, and he thought he knew everything, like many young people do. And his idealism was such. He read too much. He read way too much Tolstoy. In high school, he seriously wanted to go to South Africa and join the armed struggle to end apartheid, which is still in effect then. And he had to be talked out of it. He wanted to smuggle arms. This is an intense kid, you know, and his parents were concerned, but he didn't get in trouble. And he went to Emory University in Atlanta. He was an honors student there. He graduated in June of 1990, and his parents came down to Atlanta for the graduation. Everything seemed fine. He told them he'd see him again in a couple months. Well, then they didn't hear from him. So in August, they drove back down to Atlanta to visit him, and they found a for rent sign in the window. And he was gone. He dropped completely off the radar. Turned out, to their horror, that he'd given away a $25,000 trust fund to charity. He changed his name from Chris McCandless to Alexander Supertramp. He had driven out west and abandoned his car. And then, in a gesture that his hero Tolstoy would have understood and appreciated, after giving away this trust fund, he took the last cash in his wallet here, put it on the desert floor beside Lake Mead in Arizona, and lit it on fire and burned it up. And he took this picture of it, July 10th, 1990. You can see the date on his little Minolta. He took a lot of pictures and journals, which is how we know much of what we know about Chris. After he burned up his money, for the next 2 years, he wandered around the West, living on nothing, sleeping in the dirt, having a great adventure, hanging out with drifters and winos and bums, all of which was preparation for what he considered his greatest adventure. In April of 1992, he hitchhiked to Alaska to live off the land, completely off the land. He wanted to hike into the wilderness and live off the land for 6, 7, 8 months. Right before he left for Alaska, he'd been down in South Dakota, Madison and Carthage, South Dakota, working at a grain elevator to get a little grub steak for this guy, Wayne Westerberg, a guy he met on the road. And when he got to Fairbanks, he wrote Westerberg this postcard. It reads, "Greetings from Fairbanks. This is the last you shall hear from me, Wayne. Arrived here 2 days ago. It was very difficult to catch rides in the Yukon Territory, but I finally got here. Please return all mail I received to the sender. It might be a very long time before I return south. If this adventure proves fatal and you don't ever hear from me again, I want you to know you are a great man. I now walk into the wild, Alex." The day after he sent that postcard, he hitched south out of Fairbanks on the George Parks Highway to the edge of Denali National Park. The guy who gave him a ride, Jim Gallion, took this picture of him on McCandless's camera. Now, McCandless is going to be living off the land for 7 or 8 months, and he's not caring much. He's an idealist. He's looking for a real challenge. He really wants to test himself. And in his mind, in his idealism, any challenge that you know you're going to succeed at isn't really a challenge at all. You know, what's the point? So the only food he's carrying is a 10-pound bag of rice for backup. In his pack, all he's got is a sleeping bag and about a dozen paperback books, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Henry David Thoreau. He's got a .22 caliber rifle over his shoulder, 5 boxes of shells. Then after he got his camera back from Gallen, he turned around and hiked to these mountains in the background, the outer ranges of the Alaska range. 40 days down the trail, he arrived at this bus. Now, I took this picture the first time I visited the bus in July, but when McCandless got there the 1st of May or the 2nd of May, it was still wintry and snow on the ground. And yeah, I knew the bus was there, and it's still a total freak out to come across it. It's so incongruous. It doesn't have an engine or anything. It had been towed back there one winter behind a D5 Caterpillar by a bunch of hunters. You know, these are Alaskans, so they thought it'd be a cool idea to tow this bus back there to use as a shelter. They were moose hunters, and they wanted a shelter, so they towed this bus 30 miles from the highway so they could use it every fall when moose season opened. And McCandless was thrilled to find it. In his journal, he called it the magic bus. It had a stove inside there, a wood stove, and a couple of bunks, and he moved in and made it his base camp. You can tell how excited he was to be there by this graffito. He wrote this on a piece of plywood covering one of the broken windows in the bus. And it begins, he wrote this probably a day or two after he got there, maybe the first day. It begins with an ode to a Roger Miller song that he liked, King of the Road. It begins, 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom, an extremist, an aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. Escape from Atlanta, thou shalt not return, because the West is the best. And now, after 2 rambling years, comes the final and greatest adventure. the climactic battle to kill the false being within and victoriously conclude this spiritual revolution. 10 days and nights of freight trains and hitching brings them to the great white north. No longer to be poisoned by civilization, he flees and walks alone upon the land to become lost in the wild. Alexander Supertramp, May 1992. I've been to the bus 3 times now, most recently last fall. I can't get the kid out of my head. Even after the book's done, I'm still fascinated with him. And his presence is still all over that bus. The first time I went there, I found this. This is a crown to his molar. I know it's what it is because in his journal he mentions losing it. And it must have been really painful when that thing popped off, this raw nerve exposed, because he's chewing on roots and stuff. That's what he's living on. And it must have hurt like hell, but there's no complaint in his journal. He was a stoic, if nothing else. And his journal simply reads, "Lost crown, climbed mountain." Now this is resting on a grizzly bear skull. This grizzly bear had been shot by someone way before McCandless's tenure. He found it when he got there, but he left his mark on it. This is his handwriting. "All hail the phantom bear, the beast within us all." This is a picture McCandless took after being in a couple months, and you can tell this isn't some angst-ridden suicidal guy who's on a death trip. I don't see that in this picture anyway. I mean, he had some hard days when he first got there. He got pretty hungry. The rice ran out right away. Lasted maybe 3 days. But then eventually, after a week or two, he figured out how to gather plants, forage, how to shoot porcupines and squirrels and birds, and he was fat and happy. I mean, look at this picture. The guy's having a good time. But he was, as I said, he was the kind of kid who thought he knew everything. He didn't take advice well, and he didn't like to do his homework, and he made a grave error. Now, it's hot in this picture. It's probably 80 degrees when he took this picture. There's almost 24 hours of daylight at this latitude in the summer, and he's got his sleeves rolled down his collar button because there's really horrendous mosquitoes here. It's not that it's cool. And in this summer heat like this, well, I'll go into that later. We'll just leave that for now. McCandless, he was doing so well that he decided the challenge wasn't a challenge anymore. It was easy. So he decided he'd accomplished what he set out to do, and he decided it was time to go home. So he packed up his stuff and headed back to civilization. Problem was, he didn't know that in the heat, the rivers come up big time. The river that he'd crossed in April was a knee-deep trickle when he crossed it because it was just after breakup and it was still really cold. And now that same river was, this big raging river. It's like the upper Colorado or the middle Colorado. This is rapids, icy glacier melt. It would have been suicidal to try to cross it. So he did the smart thing. He didn't try to cross it. He returned to the bus and to wait for the river to go down. He was prepared to wait 3-4 months, whatever it took. It was a smart thing to do. Now, much of what we know about McCandless is from these paperback books, these dozen books. His sister got them back, and I read them, and he scribbled all these margin notes, which are pretty interesting. And he took 5 or 6 rolls of film, and that was interesting. But the most important thing was this journal. This is his whole journal, a little more than a page in a book in the back of a book of edible plants. And you can tell he was preoccupied, like anyone living off the land. Food is his main concern. So mostly his whole journal is a catalog of the food he's killing and gathering. Day 37, another porcupine, 4 squirrel, 2 graybird, ashbird, a 3rd porcupine, squirrel, graybird, goose. That's his journal. But some of the entries are more interesting if you read through they're cryptic and telegraphic, but there's stuff behind the basic stuff. And day 43, moose. He shot a moose, which is like hitting the jackpot for a guy living off the land. Hundreds of pounds of meat. All of a sudden, he's in Fat City. And the problem was, he didn't know how to preserve it. In South Dakota, before coming up here, hunters had told him, the way you preserve your game is you smoke it. And that's great in South Dakota if you have a smoker and the whole rig, but he didn't have any of that. So he tried to smoke it, he tried to improvise, and in the heat, the meat started to go bad right away. It got blown with flies, spoiled, maggots. Alaskans know that the way you preserve game is you cut it into really thin strips and you build a little rack and you air dry it. It's foolproof, works great. But he didn't know this, so he tried to smoke it. Bad consequences. Day 48, 5 days later. Maggots already. Smoking appears ineffective. Don't know, looks like disaster. I now wish I'd never shot the moose. One of the greatest tragedies of my life. He was a self-serious guy. He was melodramatic. He took stuff way too seriously. But this really bothered him because in his idealism, he thought it was unconscionable. He thought it was completely immoral to kill an animal and then not use every bit of it for food. And now he's just wasted hundreds of pounds of meat. It's all rotted, and he's had to leave it out for the wolves. And so he got bummed, and you can tell how bummed he was because for about a week, he didn't even write anything in his journal. He was seriously depressed. Then if you follow his entries, you see he recovers, and he remarks upon the books he finished. He finished Thoreau's Walden and the Kreutzer Sonata and Family Happiness and the Death of Ivan Ilyich. And he seemed to be doing good again. But then there's some ominous entries. Day 78, he remarks about some potato seeds. He started eating potato seeds. They were growing all over, the seeds of a plant called Eskimo potato. Started gathering them and eating them. And then a little later, a month later, day 94, he's been in 3 months now, and entry begins woodpecker, frog. Those are the animals he killed that day. And then, extremely weak, fault of potato seed, much trouble just to stand up, starving, great jeopardy. 6 days later, an even more ominous entry. Day 100, made it. He was proud of making it to this important milestone. But in weakest condition of life, death looms as a serious threat, too weak to walk out, have literally become trapped in the wild, no game. He knew he was trapped by the high water. He knew he'd eaten something that had apparently poisoned him, and I speculated about this in the book Into the Wild. But at one point, he realized he was going to die, and no one could save him, and he faced death very bravely. He tore a page out of one of his treasured novels, and he wrote this note on the back of it. I've had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. And then, it must have been the last of his strength, he walked outside, he propped up his Minolta, and he took this picture of himself holding up that sign, that farewell note, waving goodbye. You can see how emaciated and gaunt he is. Then he went back into the bus, crawled into a sleeping bag his mother had made for him, and lay down. 19 days later, September 1st, moose season opened, and these hunters came in, and they found McCandless in the back of the bus. He'd perished. I wrote about this for Outside Magazine and then went on to write Into the Wild, the book. And both the article in the Mail and the magazine generated a lot of mail. The magazine article generated more mail than any article in the magazine's history. And much of this mail was not positive. It was highly critical of McCandless for being an idiot, for being reckless and arrogant and stupid and suicidal. And it was critical of me for glorifying what many saw as a pointless death. His critics cited many things. They cited his lack of preparation and his cockiness, and, you know, they also cited, it's amazing how many of them cited his photographs. He left behind these 5 or 6 rolls of film, and a lot of the pictures were self-portraits like this, where he's striking these exuberant poses. And his critics said, you know, what kind of asshole takes all these pictures of himself like this? What kind of jerk takes a picture of himself like this? And I knew exactly what kind of jerk takes a picture of himself like that. Because I'd done the same thing on the Devil's Thumb. Now, McCandless was 24 when he died. I was 23 when I went to the Devil's Thumb by myself, had my Alaskan adventure. And as far as I could tell, the only difference between me and Chris McCandless was that I'd been very, very lucky, and I'd survived my close scrapes. McCandless had been very unlucky and had not. So I was pretty convinced that, unlike his critics, I didn't think McCandless was suicidal. I didn't think he was mentally ill. I thought he was just young and suffered the ordinary heedlessness and stupidity of youth, of which I knew a lot about. So I went on to write Into the Wild, and it almost didn't get published. I was just talking to Jeff before the show. Publishing is a weird business, and this book it got bought, and then the editor who bought it for the publishing house was fired, and no one else wanted to publish it. And it was just by luck that it was published at all, and no one thought it would sell very much. I didn't. I just wrote it because I was fascinated with this guy. And then people started reading it, and they sent me on tour, and the tour was extended. And when I went on the book tour, and I'd sign books afterwards, people would come up to me and say, you know, I did something like that when I was a kid, or my brother did something like that, or I always wanted to do something like that. And it turns out there's a lot of people out there who identify with McCandless, and I was gratified to hear this. And I left this book tour early, a year ago, March of '96, to go to Mount Everest. Outside Magazine asked me to go there as a journalist. They were concerned about this recent trend over the last, it's only been the last 4 or 5 years, really, since it's really started in a big way, that Everest has been opened up to ordinary amateur climbers, relatively inexperienced climbers who pay $65,000 to be guided up the mountain. The magazine wasn't sure this was such a good idea, so they sent me along on one of these trips to observe it and write about it. So in March 27th of last year, I flew off to Kathmandu, which is an amazing place. I mean, I know many of you have been there, and it's like another planet. And you could spend months and months there, but we had a mountain to climb. So after a day and a half, we boarded this weird Russian helicopter and flew off to the Himalaya. Now, this is Rob Hall. He was the leader of my guided expedition. He was the most respected guide in the Everest business. He'd already gotten 39 people to the summit of the mountain previous to this. He was considered the safest, most conservative, most meticulous guide in the business, and I was really happy that the magazine had sent me on his trip. 2 hours later, we landed in Lukla, 9,000 feet in the mountains, in this village here. And now, there was 8 clients and 3 guides on this trip, and I didn't know any of them beforehand. None of us clients knew each other. This was very troubling to me. I was used to climbing with trusted friends, 1 or 2 trusted friends, and here I'm with all these strangers. So we all made a big effort to get to know each other as soon as we met. And this is one of my clients. This is Beck Weathers, a doctor from Dallas, Texas. Base camp's at 17,600 feet. Half the oxygen there is at sea level. Sherpas regularly cover the distance between this village, Lukla, and base camp in 2 days. But they're acclimatized and they're tough. And if you tried to do that, or I tried to do it coming from sea level where I live, or even Boulder, you'd probably die or get really, really sick. A lot of trekkers die at these altitudes because they go too high too fast. It's really, altitude is a scary thing. But if you go slow, there's no problem, and Rob Hall knew this. So he allotted 10 days for this trek to base camp, which made it really, really nice. It's just one of the most fun things I've ever done because we never walked more than 3 hours a day. It was completely leisurely. Second day of the trek, we got our first view of Everest from the ground. This is the highest point on Earth, 4 vertical miles overhead. Now, we can't hear it because it's too far away, but this is the jet stream. Everest pokes up into the jet stream. You can see what happens. These 140-mile-an-hour winds hit the summit, and it leaves this contrail of ice crystals. Those are actually blowing 2 miles into Tibet. Now, this jet stream, it's unthinkably harsh up there when it's blowing like this, and it blows like this almost all the time. Sometimes it lets off, and sometimes it comes back. This is what killed 5 climbers a few weeks ago on the north side. They were up there when the jet stream came back, and they didn't have a chance. They were strong climbers. It was sobering to look at that. Same day, we arrived in Namche Bazaar, which is the cultural center, sort of the capital of the Khumbu, the Sherpa homeland, the center of their culture. And we spent a day here to acclimatize. And the next day, we resumed our trek. Now, this country, the Khumbu, around Mount Everest, these valleys and mountains around Everest, is some of the most spectacularly rugged country I've ever seen, but it's not wilderness and hasn't been for hundreds of years. The Sherpa moved south here from Tibet about 400 years ago or something, and they're devout Buddhists, and they adorn the landscape with artifacts of their religion, and they build these altars, these stone altars called chortens on ridges, crests, and hilltops. They put up prayer flags. Every flap of the wind sends prayer to God. Prayer flags on all these boulders, and it makes somehow it adds a lot to the trek. One of the things that makes the trek so nice is we didn't have to carry anything. This yak here is carrying all our stuff, and so all you have to carry is a day pack with a rain jacket, and it was nice. I liked it, and it got spoiled. We did get to know each other as we hiked in. This is Mike Groom, a plumber from Brisbane, Australia, who is one of Rob Hall's guides, and he's a very, very accomplished high-altitude climber. He had climbed Everest without bottled oxygen in '93. Now, this is something only a handful of people have done or are capable of doing. You have to be a very gifted, a certain kind of athlete to do it. I mean, I wouldn't even consider it. I would die right away. Mike had also climbed K2, the second highest mountain in the world, Kanchenjunga, the third highest. On his descent from Kanchenjunga, he'd been caught out after dark in a storm, no shelter. He'd frozen his feet very, very badly. He'd actually had to have all his toes amputated and parts of each foot. And most people this would have crippled, but not Mike. He was a very graceful athlete, and he didn't even walk with a limp. This is Doug Hansen. Now, a lot of the media after the tragedy, has reported that all these clients are novices, and the word that's used a lot is tour groups. It's sort of like it was either should we take the cruise to Barbados or should we go climb Everest? But a lot of us didn't belong there, but it's more complicated, like life. This is more complicated than the media usually presents it. And Doug Hansen here was a fellow client, became a really close friend of mine. Doug was neither inexperienced nor rich. He was a postal worker from the Seattle area, from Kent, Washington. He had been climbing for 15 years. He paid for his dream of climbing Everest by working nights in the post office and doing construction by day. He'd actually been to Everest once before, the year before, in 1995. He'd gone with Rob Hall, and he'd gotten all the way to the south summit, just 300 feet below the top. But it was 1:30 in the afternoon then when they got there, and Rob Hall has a strict rule. If you're not on top by 2 o'clock, you have to turn around for safety's sake. And he turned Doug around at 1:30 because he wasn't going to make the top by 2. And he felt bad about this, so he invited Doug back in '96. Actually, he talked Doug into coming back. He gave him a really steep discount. Rob was actually losing money by having Doug come back, but Rob was a big-hearted guy, and he wanted Doug to realize his dream, so Doug was back for a second try. Every few miles, there's one of these tea houses. You pull in for some chong, the local brew, or some tea. This is Beck Weathers, Helen Wilton from Christchurch, New Zealand, our base camp manager. Andy Harris, who became my closest friend on the trip, 31 years old, a very strong guide from Queenstown, New Zealand. Let's see, April 8th of last year, we arrived at the Khumbu Glacier, 12-mile tongue of ice that flows down from the foot of Everest. Day after that, we got to base camp itself. These tents here are pitched on rubble, but the rubble is on the glacier, and it's right under your tent. At night, you hear the glacier moving beneath you. It cracks and creaks and groans. It's very eerie. It's actually kind of mesmerizing and nice. It's not a good picture, but there's about 60 tents in this photo. Now, this is only a small fraction of the tents at base camp. They continue down glacier for half a mile. There's more than 300 tents on the glacier, actually. It was a full-blown city, and the mayor of that city was Rob Hall, our leader. He was the most respected guy on the mountain, and anytime there was a dispute, people would come to him to solve it. Even his rivals, and there were plenty of rivals, there were other guided groups competing with him directly for clients. But Rob was so respected that they came to him, and even for advice, his rivals would come to him for advice, and no one came to him more often than this guy, Scott Fisher, a guide. Scott was from Seattle. I knew Scott before the trip. Scott is a legend in Seattle. He's an amazingly strong climber. He's an aerobic animal. He climbed Everest without gas in '94 to become one of the elite to do that. He'd also climbed K2 and many other things. Highly respected climber, but he'd never guided Everest before. So he came to Rob Hall a lot for advice, and Rob gave it freely, because even though they were competitors, they were also friends, and Rob, that's just what they did. And Scott hung out a lot with us, and he was camped only a few minutes away. So we socialized a lot with his group, and we got to know his team. We got to know his guides. This is Anatoly Bukharev, who many of you know. He spends a lot of time in Boulder. He's a legendary Kazakh, Russian-speaking guide. One of the greatest Himalayan climbers of the era. He's climbed more than 20 years at high altitude. He'd climbed Everest 3 times before last year without bottled oxygen. He's amazing. He's in a league of his own. This is Lobsang Jongbu Sherpa. Lobsang was 23 years old, very young. Scott Fisher had hired him as his sirdar, his head climbing Sherpa. And he deserved that responsibility because he was an amazing climber. He'd only been climbing 3 years, but he'd already made 3 oxygenless ascents of Everest. Scott told me that he thought Lobsang was the second coming of Reinhold Messner, the greatest climber of all time. Lobsang was a remarkable guy, and he was very, very popular. Now, most Sherpas around Westerners tend to be shy, reserved, not among themselves, but they can keep to themselves, but not Lobsang. He was really flashy and outgoing, gregarious. He reminded me of Deion Sanders. He was cocky, and he thought he was the equal of any Western climber, and he was, but he didn't mind telling you that. And he was really popular. I mean, everyone liked Lobsang. This is Neil Beidelman, who used to live here in town. He was one of the organizers of the infamous Boulder Marathon. He now lives back in Aspen, where he's from originally. He's an aerospace engineer, a rocket scientist, great athlete, great long-distance runner, enters all these marathon races and does well at them. And he'd climb Maklu, a very, very responsible guide, and has become a good friend. We also got to know some of Scott's clients. On the bottom there's Charlotte Fox, ski patroller from Aspen. Charlotte's a very strong athlete. Hasn't been climbing that long, but had already done a lot. Now the 14 highest mountains in the world are known as the 8,000-meter peaks because they're each above 8,000 meters, 26,200 feet about. And Charlotte had already climbed 2 of these 14 peaks before Everest. She's getting a back rub here by Sandy Hill Pittman from New York. Sandy had climbed 6 of the so-called 7 summits, the highest points in each of the 7 continents. All she had left was Everest. She already tried to climb Everest twice unsuccessfully, and she was taking it very seriously this time. She was very determined to climb it. Everest, the Tibetans call Everest Jomolungma, which roughly translates as Goddess Mother of the Earth. And to the Buddhists, to the Sherpas, in the pantheon of deities, their pantheon of deities, perhaps no god is more important than than Sagarmatha, or Jomolungma as it's called. And before you can walk on her sacred flanks, you have to be purified with a religious ceremony known as a puja. So the Sherpas, for each expedition at base camp, I don't know, there's a dozen of these expeditions, they built one of these beautiful chortens, these stone altars, and then they erect this pine pole and string prayer flags from it. And then you have this puja. You wait for an auspicious day when the stars are right, and then you hang your ice axes and carabiners to be blessed from the chorten. And this priest comes up from the valley, and the Sherpas bring out their pictures of the Dalai Lama, who's in town today, I understand. And you make offerings of rum and tsampa and Snickers bars and other food. And then the priest chants scripture for 2 hours while everyone else gets drunk, and it's not an option. You have to drink. I mean, this is nothing is more serious. No. I mean, this is a very serious ceremony. You have to do this. It's very important. So when no one can stand anymore, you take fistfuls of barley flour and you hurl it all over each other, and then you're ready to climb. Now this whole ceremony says a lot to me about the Sherpas, because it's a very important ceremony. You wouldn't think of not doing this, but they have fun at it, and they take it, it's a celebration, and everyone laughs and giggles, even while the priest is chanting. And that somehow this sort of says a lot to me with the Sherpa. So at the end of the puja, you string these prayer flags over the whole camp, sort of like a force field to protect the tents from harm. And then hung over the next day, you tackle the first obstacle, which is the Khumbu icefall, which rises directly above camp. Now, the icefall is really scary. This is base camp down here. This is Camp 1, 2,000 feet higher. And in between, the glacier spills over this 2,000-foot drop. It's really steep. So when it spills over it shatters into these huge ice blocks. Many of them are much bigger than this library, the size of 8- and 10-story buildings. And the glacier in here moves between 3 and 4 feet a day. So as it moves, these huge blocks are always shifting and tumbling. And you've got to weave your way up around them, and not just once. You've got to do this. We did this 8 times, because the summit of Everest has only 1/3 as much oxygen as sea level. And if you went from Boulder to the summit somehow, in a magic carpet or something, and we're dropping the summit, you'd pass out in a couple minutes and you'd be dead probably inside of 15 or 20. But if you go up and down slowly, a little higher each time over the course of a month, your body adapts in really miraculous ways, and you can sort of function up there after a month. Not well, but you can survive for a little while. So you have to go through the icefall. Every time you go up to do an acclimatization trip, you have to go through the icefall. We did it 8 times. And it's scary. I was gripped every time. There's all these crevasse crossings. They're all rigged with ropes and ladders. It doesn't take any technical skill, but a lot of times I crawled across these ladders on my hands and knees. I had no pride. I mean, it's scary. And sometimes the next day you might come up and the glacier would have shifted and this ladder would be bent like a pretzel, or it'd be dropped into the crevasse. These huge ice blocks are always shifting. You hear them collapsing around you. Every trip up, the glacier looks different. You just hope you're not under one or on top of one when it goes. 19 people have died in this icefall. You start climbing at 4 in the morning before dawn, because it's 5 or 10 degrees there, and you want to do it when it's cold, because Everest is just north of the tropical latitudes, and it's intense ultraviolet radiation. And when the sun hits about 8 or 8:30, it gets hot, and the glacier then gets even more active. These guys aren't out of the woods, and they're wishing they were up there. The sun's hit. Camp 1 is 19,500 feet. First trip up, we just got to the tents, turned right back around, went down the same day, feeling pretty sick. Rested a few days, came up again and felt better this time, and spent a night here, and then went on from here, Camp 1, up to Camp 2, and you can see the route up to Camp 2 from here. From here, the route gets sort of flat, relatively flat, and it goes up the floor of this deep canyon called the Western Coombe, CWM, a Welsh word, sort of like being in the Grand Canyon at 20,000 feet. And you start climbing again up this canyon floor before dawn, because as soon as the sun hits these icy walls of the canyon, they reflect the radiation back at you, and it turns the whole thing into this huge solar oven. And you go from wearing your down jacket and being freezing cold, shivering. 20 minutes later, you strip down to your long underwear, put these sun hats on, and you're sweltering. I had heat stroke. I mean, it was grim. The heat was as bad as the cold. Base camp, you can't see the upper mountain at all. It's kind of weird. You just can't even see that whole upper half of the mountain is hidden behind the western shoulder. So here, you round a bend in the Western Coombe, and all of a sudden you see the summit for the first time, and it's pretty sobering. This is the top, 2 vertical miles overhead. And This just looks like a little cloud because it's hidden behind the intervening ridge, but that's the jet stream, this huge contrail. And now we're close enough so you can hear it. And it sounds like a flock of 747s taking off. And you can hear it all the time because it's blowing all the time. And it's very sobering. This is Camp 2, 21,500 feet. Another view of 2. It lies near the head of this valley, this canyon, the Western Kumu. From here, the route suddenly gets a lot steeper. This is Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain in the world, 27,900 feet. The route ascends what's called the Lhotse face, the steep ice face, crosses this limestone cliff called the Yellow Band. Then it ascends this ridge, the Geneva Spur, right here. That's 26,000 feet. That's the South Col, C-O-L, a word meaning pass. It's a pass between Lhotse and Everest. Everest is right up here. This is where our high camp would be, Camp 4, from where we'd launch our summit push. This is another view of the Lhotse face. This is the face, the ice face here is more than 4,000 feet, which is too high for most climbers to do in a day without exhausting themselves right before the summit. You don't want to do that, so the standard thing to do is put a camp up in the middle right here, Camp 3, 24,000 feet. And it's not a good place to camp. You've got to hack ledges out of the ice to put tents up, but it's really the most practical way to do it. And then from there it climbs this cliff, the Yellow Band, and up to Geneva Spur to the South Col. This is the base of the Lhotse face. Climbers up to fixed ropes. Starts out pretty steep up this Bergschrund, but from a technical climber's point of view, it's really not very steep. It's deceptively not steep. I mean, it deceives you. It's only about 45 degrees or something. And you're tempted not even to clip into this rope, which is a big mistake, because if you stumble or a rock comes down, a lot of rocks come down here, you're going to fall to your death. Just 2 weeks ago, a Sherpa was killed because he wasn't clipped into the rope when he fell somehow. A Sherpa on a Malaysian expedition. A number of people have died here. This is Yasko Namba, this woman in the foreground. She was one of my teammates at Klein on Rob Hall's team. She was a Federal Express personnel director from Tokyo, Japan, 47 years old, hoping to become the oldest woman to climb Everest. Yasko is tiny. She weighed 91 pounds, she claimed. I doubt she even weighed that much. Her wrists were like sparrow's bones. And this tiny woman, I was in awe of her. She was the most determined, focused individual I've ever met. She was inspiring. This is Andy Harris pulling into Camp 3. You can see tents are just lined up here on this ledge that the Sherpas have hacked out of the face. This is the view from Camp 3 looking down. This is Camp 1, this is Camp 2, and now we're at 3, and it's exciting because before we've been laboring up the floor of this canyon, and it's claustrophobic, and you can't see much, and it's hot, and suddenly the view opens up, and you feel like you're really getting up on the roof of the world. Now the summit is still a vertical mile overhead, but you feel like you're getting up there. You also feel really shitty because you're at 24,000 feet for the first time. And I mean, it's like you have a bad hangover all the time. And you try to eat a candy bar and you throw it up. I couldn't hold any food down. I'd take a step and I was exhausted. So we spent a night here. I didn't sleep. I don't think anyone slept. And then our acclimatization was over. And we went down to base camp to rest for 4, 5, 6 days. And then we're going to do our summit push. Base camp doesn't look like much, but it's really quite comfortable. There's showers here, built out of stone. The food is good, and we're acclimatized now, so the air actually starts to feel sort of thick here. And the most amazing thing about base camp is these satellite phones. There were 4 or 5 of them. Our expedition had one. Scott Fisher's expedition, Sandy Pittman here brought one. Sandy's calling from her communications stand at base camp, and it was very surreal. I mean, I'd done a lot of expeditions, and I never even had a radio before. You know, you go in and you're out of touch for a month or 6 weeks or whatever. And now, you know, I'd be lying in my tent at base camp, and I'd hear a phone ring in the next tent over. and someone would yell, "John, it's your wife." And I'd go running over, and I'd talk to Linda. And I liked that, but it was very discombobulating. And one of the strange things that I never got used to, too, because there's phones, people were filing internet dispatches every day, daily internet dispatches. 4 or 5 expeditions had websites. So people back home would often know more about what was going on the mountain than we did on the mountain. You'd call someone in the States, and they'd tell you, "Yeah, I hear the Yugoslavs are going to Camp 4," and you wouldn't even know that, you know? It's like, wow, really? And it was this weird information warp. Now, the first really disturbing event happened right about this time before the summit push. This guy in the basket is Nawang Topche, Sherpa. He's the uncle of Lobsang, that flashy head climbing Sherpa on Scott's team. Lobsang and Nawang were very close. And Nawang, well, people think Sherpas are invincible, that they're supermen and women, and they're really strong, but they're not invincible. The diseases of high altitude, cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, strike everyone, regardless of your fitness or your experience. They strike randomly. And Nawang was at Camp 2, 21,500 feet, and he came down with high altitude pulmonary edema. This disease, it comes on, suddenly, without warning. Your lungs fill with fluid. If you don't descend very, very quickly, you die. It's that simple. Problem was, Nawang got this, and he wouldn't admit he was sick. He didn't tell anybody. Because if you're a Sherpa, these jobs on expeditions are very competitive. It's competitive to get these jobs. This is a country where the annual per capita income is $160 per year. And you get a job like this as a climbing Sherpa, you're going to make $1,500, maybe $2,000 for an expedition. So people want these jobs. Nawang's got kids in schools in Kathmandu, and he wants to keep sending them there. And if he gets sick, he's not going to get hired again. There's other guys who don't get sick. So he didn't tell anyone he was sick. Finally, he collapsed and had to be dragged and hauled down through the icefall. Very dangerous rescue performed by Lobsang and Neil Beidelman. Very bold thing they did. He should have gotten better at base camp, but he didn't. So he was loaded into this basket. You can see he's wearing oxygen. And he was carried down valley to the hospital at 14,000 feet. We saw him go, didn't think anything of it. What we didn't know is that several hours after this picture was taken, he stopped breathing for 5 minutes, suffered permanent brain damage. He was put into a Kathmandu hospital, a vegetable. A month later, after we'd all gone back to the States, he died. No one knows this. Nawang's death wasn't reported. All these other deaths were reported, but Nawang was just a Sherpa, and his death went unremarked. We didn't even know about his death at base camp. It hadn't happened yet, but we didn't know he was gravely ill. Even if we had, it probably wouldn't have made a difference. We were all so focused on the top. We've got summit fever now. We're going for it in a couple days. So right before summit push, we posed for this photo. You can see how confident and cheerful everyone was then. This is at the base camp Chorten. This is Rob Hall's team. This is Caroline McKenzie, the base camp doctor. She's from New Zealand. Doug Hansen, the postal worker from the Seattle area. John Taskey, anesthesiologist from Brisbane, Australia. Suze Allen, an Australian trekker who didn't go above base camp. That's me. That's Stuart Hutchinson, a brilliant medical researcher from Montreal. Helen Wilton, base camp manager from New Zealand. Andy Harris, my good buddy, guide from New Zealand. Beck Weathers from Dallas. Rob Hall, leader. Lou Kosiski, a 53-year-old attorney from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Frank Fishbeck, a publisher from Hong Kong. Mike Groom, guide from Brisbane, Australia. And Yasuko Namba, client from Japan. We've been at base camp for about a month now, almost exactly a month. The whole time we've been here, jet stream's been ripping the summit like this horizontal. I mean, that cloud's formed, so the summit's poking up into this 140-mile-an-hour wind, and that's the contrail that's formed. And you can't climb when it's like that. But every May, if you're lucky, in early May, the monsoon starts pushing north out of the Bay of Bengal. And when it pushes north, it moves the jet stream north too. So you have this window before the monsoon arrives, but after the jet stream leaves, where you have calm weather. And this is when you have to climb. This window of calm weather might last a few hours, might last a few days, might last a few weeks, so that's rare. But you don't know how long it's going to last, and you want to be at Camp 4, ready to climb when it opens. So you've got to gamble, because it takes 4 days to get from base camp to Camp 4. So you've got to leave base camp, you've got to try to guess when that window is going to open, leave base camp, and try to be there when it opens. So Rob Hall had reached the summit 4 times, and 2 of those days had been on May 10th. He considered it an auspicious day. So he pegged May 10th for our summit attempt. He invited Scott Fisher's team to join us. And so on May 6th, so we'd be there to do it on May 10th, we left base camp with the wind still blowing. There's base camp. You can see the tents down here. And went through the icefall up it one last time, and I was as gripped as ever. That's Stuart and John Taskey and Andy Harris going through the icefall. Again, it's playing roulette when you go through that thing. We were acclimatized now, so we didn't even stop at Camp 1. We went all the way to Camp 2 in a day, which was pretty exhausting. So the next day we took a rest day at Camp 2. This is Andy Harris, rested, feeling confident. Beck Weathers, feeling confident at Camp 2. Mike Groom on the left, guide, and Rob Hall on the right, the leader. Now they're a little nervous because Rob's committed us to this May 10th summit day, and It's a gamble. Above this, Camp 3, we go on oxygen. We start using oxygen, and there's only enough oxygen for one summit attempt. By the time we get up to Camp 4, we're in the death zone, and we can only hang out there for a day, 24 hours, before we either have to go up or go down. So if Rob's guessed wrong about the weather, that's our summit attempt. We don't get to try the mountain. May 8th, we left Camp 2 and started climbing the Lhotse face. Now, this isn't a very good picture, but it's an instructive one. This is the base of the Lhotse face. These guys are at the bottom of it. You follow this line of climbers, looks like a bunch of ants, going all the way up to Camp 3. There's probably 70 climbers in the southern tip of South America. I went there with one friend, Dan Cawthorn. We climbed this route. Again, we've skied 6 days across an ice cap to get here in 100-mile-an-hour winds, some of the worst weather in the world. And no one knows we're here. We don't have a radio or anything. We're on our own. There's no chance for rescue. But we were prepared for that, and we accepted that, and we climbed conservatively. And that's the way I thought climbing was supposed to be. On Everest, it's really different. If you're a client on a guided trip, you have to let the guide make decisions. That's the way it's got to be. He can't have 8 clients making decisions on their own, so you give up that independence and that self-reliance, and it's hard to do. Sherpas do a lot of the work, and it makes a huge difference in helping you get to the summit. They put up all the tents. They make all the camps. They do all the cooking, which doesn't sound like much, but anyone who's done any winter mountaineering, it's a huge amount of work. On Everest, it's 2, 3, 4 hours a day of chipping ice and melting it for water and cooking, and that saves you a lot of energy that you're going to need on summit day. And nobody on the mountain would have a prayer of climbing it without the Sherpa support. These are some of the Sherpas that went up the mountain with us. This is Tendi, Norbu, Kami. This is Ang Dorje, very remarkable young man. He was Rob Hall's Sirdar, his head climbing Sherpa. Ang Dorje had climbed Everest 3 times previously. Very, very quiet, shy, hard to even engage in conversation. He was a devout Buddhist. He saw his purpose in life is looking after us and providing for our well-being. It was the key, he thought, for him to escaping this cycle of suffering and moving to the next level, was if he did a good enough job at this. So he looked after us and took it very seriously. This is his friend Arita. Perhaps the greatest help the Sherpas provided was they hauled all the loads. We never carried anything except our personal gear. And we weren't alone in this. It's not just guided trips. People don't realize, but the Sherpas, almost every expedition, virtually every expedition, relies on Sherpas almost as much as we did. I mean, Sherpas, there's a lot of hauling that goes on. This is a siege of the mountain. Hundreds of oxygen bottles have to be hauled up to the high camp, stage by stage. Food, fuel, tents, sleeping bags. And the Sherpas do all of that. They fix the ropes, most of them. And these are our Team Sherpas heading up the Lhotse face on May 8th. We got there in early afternoon to Camp 3, 24,000 feet, and we're all kind of tense now, because this is it. This is our shot coming up, and it's all or nothing. At night, I took this picture looking down from Camp 3, and you can see all these clouds. Every afternoon, or most afternoons, you get this convection condensation, just like afternoon thunderstorms here. The clouds would form and might snow for an hour or two, and then they'd dissipate in the evening, and it was no big deal. We didn't worry us. Indeed, the next morning, you can see this blue sky over Nuptse. I took this picture at 25,000 feet, looking down from the base of the yellow band. This is Camp 3. You can see the tents. Again, here's this line of 70, maybe more climbers coming up. That's dangerous. There's rocks whizzing down there, and you're stuck. You can't get out of the way. They're all on the same rope. Very, very alarming, but there's no way around it. If you want to climb Everest by either the south side or the northeast ridge, the 2 easy routes, relatively easy routes, that's what it's like these days. This is the yellow band, this steep limestone cliff. It's actually, I was surprised how steep it was. The top of the yellow band, disturbing sight. This is the south summit. The summit is hidden, but it's just 300 feet behind that. That's the jet stream. Now, we're going to be going for the summit in a few hours. We actually start climbing before midnight on May 9th. We'll be there in just a few hours, and it's still blowing like hell up there. Rob Hall's saying, "Don't worry, mates. It's going to quit. Trust me." And we're not so sure. This picture is from that same spot, a telephoto. If you look closely, right above the red dot, there's a black speck. Right there's 3 more black specks. Those are climbers. May 9th. 4 guys from Montenegro, what used to be part of Yugoslavia, going for the top on May 9th. And we all watch them really closely, because the wind's blowing. You can see it blowing. But if they make the top, maybe we can too. And if they don't make the top, it doesn't bode well for us. Well, right after I took this picture, I watched with dismay as they turned around and headed down, short of the summit. This is Camp 4, 26,000 feet, South Col. Most godforsaken place I've ever been. There's no snow in this photo because it's almost always windy here and it's all blown into Tibet. It's either rock or ice here. You're in the death zone now, you're breathing oxygen. Even with oxygen, you feel like your body's dying little by little, minute by minute. Your brain cells are dying, your body's falling apart. You don't want to spend any more time here than you have to. We're going to rest for a few hours, then go to the summit and get the hell out of there. It's blowing 40 knots. When I got here, you can see it's littered with oxygen bottles and shredded tents. Some of that stuff dates back to 1953, when Sir Edmund Hillary first climbed the mountain. I was the first client to get there, about 1 in the afternoon. As I waited for my teammates to arrive, they straggled in. By 4 or 5, everyone was there. But the wind picked up, got stronger and stronger throughout the day. By 5, when the last of them arrived, it was blowing 70 knots at the South Col, at the tents. It was probably blowing 150 up here, and you can see that howling up there. And I thought, this is it. It's all over. I thought, too bad, not this year. Amazing thing happened. 7 p.m., all of a sudden the wind just died, stone cold, no wind. Rob Hall, acting like he knew this was going to happen all along, calls over, saddle up, John-O, we're climbing. And so we got up and started to climb. Now, Camp 4 is right here. The route begins by climbing the steep blue ice bulge, which isn't so hard going up, but our crampons are dull from a month of walking on rocks and stuff, and I wondered how we're going to get back down this. There wasn't a rope fixed. Then the route climbs these snow gullies. It joins the southeast ridge right here at a place we called the Balcony. Then it continues up the ridge. On the upper ridge, you get into these steep rock steps. We had a plan Sherpas were going to go out ahead of time and fix ropes over this to speed the ascent. And then here's the south summit, and the summit's just 300 feet beyond that. Just before midnight, we started to climb, and it was one of those, it was a very memorable morning of climbing. It was actually beautiful. Despite what people tell you about Everest, it was one of the most beautiful mornings of climbing I ever had. We started out climbing by headlamp, but within an hour or two, then this bright moon came up. It was so bright that you could switch off your headlamp and just climb by moonlight. You look off to the south, and you could see the monsoon approaching, these huge thunderheads towering to 40,000 feet, this wall of thunderheads, and continuous lightning, this orange and blue lightning, like I'd never seen anything like that, spouting out of the top and within it, and it was mesmerizing. It was like this dream, climbing through a dream. I was out front with Angdorji and Mike Groom, breaking trail. About 5 a.m., Angdorji and I had moved a little ahead, and we got just below the balcony, and the sun began to come up. And I'm sure this is the most amazing sunrise I've ever seen. Now, we're looking down now at these 24,000 foot mountains. This is Ama Dablam, a very famous mountain in the Khumbu, 23,400 feet. And it's been towering over us, the whole trek in and at base camp. And now we're looking down on it. It was amazing. Ama Dablam, Kentega, and Temserku, these beautiful peaks that seemed so big before now seem small. Angdorji and I sat down at the balcony at 5:30 to wait for the others, and just spellbound, the two of us sitting side by side, not speaking. We're looking at 4 of the 5 highest mountains in the world as the sun comes up. You can look off to the east, and there's Kanchenjunga, the 3rd highest mountain in the world. Sun coming up on Makalu, just 8 miles away, one of the most beautiful mountains in the Himalaya. This, I think, mountain probably holds special. This is a special mountain to Jeff, I think. I know from his reading, he's been there, and it's a beautiful mountain. Just 8 miles away, 5th highest mountain in the world. Lhotse, right across from us, 4th highest mountain in the world. This is 27,900 feet, and we're virtually as high as that now, and it's really exciting. So Angdorji and I sat down to wait, because Rob Hall had told us 2 things on summit day that were critically important. The first of them was, whoever's out in front, when you get to the balcony, I want you to wait until we've all assembled there, because I can't have you guys scattered over the whole damn mountain. So, fine, Angdorji and I sat down to wait. Mike Groom arrived a few minutes later, and it's cold now. It's probably 40 below at its coldest, maybe colder. You can see the icicles hanging off his oxygen mask. It was bitter, but the sun's coming up. There's Makalu. This is that west face that has attracted so many. And we waited there for an hour and a half while all these other climbers filed up, and it was really frustrating, because the second thing Rob had told us, the second firm order, is that at 2 o'clock, you're all going to turn around no matter where you are. This is the most important rule of climbing Everest. Because Rob told us, your brain's not going to, he told us this over and over again, your brain's not going to work up there. And he was right. We're stupid already from hypoxia. But you don't have to use your brain. All you've got to do is use your watch. And when it says 2 o'clock, you turn around, and that will probably save you your life. So this is frustrating because, it's this very short block of time, and we're wasting it, sitting on our butts, waiting for the group to arrive. But we couldn't do anything about it, so I just bit my tongue and sat there. Now, this photo is worth looking at. It's instructive. This is Lhotse. This is the South Col, that high pass between Everest and Lhotse. It's a big, flat area, the size of 3 football fields. We've come up the Lhotse face. This is the Geneva Spur. This is the route up. Down this side, drops away 4,000 feet here, even more down here, down the Kangshung face into Tibet. This is the border between Nepal and Tibet. You can see the tents right here, catching the first light of the morning sun. They're on the western edge of the col, right at this edge. It would take you maybe 15 minutes on a good day like this to walk all the way across from one side and the other. It's flat ground. You couldn't fall off if you tried. To show you how severe it gets on Everest and how extreme it is up there. Later this same day, 11 climbers, including 2 of my teammates, Beck Weathers and Yasko Namba, made it all the way down here to safety, apparent safety, minutes away from the tents. They're right here. But the wind came up, blowing so strong they couldn't see their own feet. And they got lost, and they wandered over here, and they couldn't make it back to the tents. They spent a night out, and before the night was over, one of my teammates was dead. That's what Everest is like. That's how extreme it is up there. This is the balcony, 27,600 feet. We've all assembled now. Rob's given us the okay to go ahead. This is a classic Everest picture. When you see the newsreels and stuff, the climbers are always striding briskly along. But this is what it's really like. These guys have just taken a step. Now they're leaning over their ice axes for 4 or 5 breaths. Then they'll take another step. Then they'll rest for 4 or 5 more breaths. Then another step. This is what it's really like to climb Everest. It's a huge fucking ordeal. It's not fun. It's grim. It's work. This is, I don't know, a couple hours later, maybe 1,000 feet higher, right beneath those rock steps on the southeast ridge. Another bottleneck. The ropes we thought were going to be fixed weren't for a number of reasons. The plan broke down. Plans break down on Everest. That's to be expected. But it was another delay of an hour while Neil Beidelman and Ang Dorji fixed the ropes above. Eventually, we started moving again. This is well above 28,000 feet now. Mike Groom on the upper ridge. And I felt like I was in outer space here. I mean, it's so, this environment is so harsh. The margin of surviving and not is very, very slim, and there's no forgetting it. I mean, you're breathing oxygen. You feel totally dependent on your life support systems. You're in this big down suit, like a space suit that's sort of cutting you off from the world. Your brain is, even with oxygen, your brain is operating on the level of a lower reptile. It's all you can do to think about where you're going to put your feet, and you better think about that because there aren't fixed ropes for much of this, and if you trip, it's a long way down. 11 o'clock, despite these delays, I arrived on the south summit. Neil Beidelman and Martin Adams were already there. They'd been there since about 10, and for the first time, I began to think, wow, we might actually get up this hill. Blue sky, the weather's looking great, and from this point, you look up, and for the first time, you see the summit. And it's really, really exciting. It just sort of takes your breath away. And it's deceiving. I mean, it looks so close. It looks like you could spit and hit it. All you've got to do is climb this knife edge ridge and climb this vertical, 40 feet of vertical rock and snow. This is the Hillary Step, the most famous pitch on Everest. And then you're there. Now, but in your brain-damaged state, you don't think about that. You just think it's close. There's no way I'm not going to make it now. And people wonder, why didn't people heed these strict turnaround times? But I understand, because if I'm honest with myself, and I'm right here at the South Summit, let's say it's 1:30, and Rob Hall tells me, sorry, Jono, you got to turn around, like he told Doug Hansen the year before. If I'm honest with myself, I'm probably going to tell Rob to stuff it, that I'm going up there, because I've suffered for a month, and I'm not ever going to be back here. And it looks so close, the temptation is to go anyway, and a lot of people did that. And it's dangerous to yourself and to your whole team. Not everyone was that stupid. This is Lou Kosiski, the lawyer from Michigan on my team, and he was just below the South Summit at 11 o'clock, along with 2 other teammates, Stuart Hutchison and John Taskey, and they were stuck in traffic, stuck behind a Taiwanese team that was going really slow, and they sat down and said, we're probably not going to get to the top by 2. We should turn around. And somehow, they summoned the judgment to do that. It was amazing. It was amazing that they did, and I applaud them for it. They're alive today because of it. They deserve a lot of credit. The rest of us kept going. I should add that at the South Summit, we got there at 11, And we had a plan for ropes to be fixed ahead of time on the most exposed part of the upper ridge above this, and they weren't. So those of us who were there just sat down waiting for someone to fix them. We weren't thinking. And we sat there for an hour just sort of gazing off stupidly at the sights until Neil Beidelman finally said, gee, maybe we should fix the ropes. And so he grabbed a coil and I grabbed a coil, and Anatoly and Neil and I and Andy Harris went out ahead to fix these two coils over the most exposed places. And this is Anatoly leading the Hillary step. Now, Anatoly's not using oxygen, which is controversial for a guide, but he climbed it brilliantly. He's an amazing climber, leading this pitch. Slow, even for Anatoly, it took him probably more than 40 minutes to climb this 40 feet. This is Anatoly a little higher. This is the summit, by the way, and we can see it now. And there's no turning back now. I mean, we got it, locked in the crosshairs. And indeed, just after 1 o'clock, first Anatoly, then me, then Andy, reached the highest point on Earth. And this is Andy, who'd become a good friend by now, standing on the summit. This is the survey marker that had been put up there in '93 by an Italian team. Anatoly's draped it with prayer flags. I think Anatoly put them there. There's an old oxygen bottle someone left from the year before. So I took this picture of Andy, but I was in no mood to celebrate. I hadn't slept in more than 2 days or eaten in more than 2 days, and I was really frightened because I'd done something really stupid. We each had 3 oxygen bottles on the summit day. But when I got to the south summit, I was into my second bottle, but I thought I could get to the summit and back to the south summit without getting into my third. So I left my third bottle behind because it weighed 7 pounds. Didn't want to carry it. I can't believe how stupid I was. I sort of guessed, oh, it probably's got an hour and it probably won't be any more, or 2 hours, it probably won't be any more than 2 hours up and back. Well, on the summit now, I happen to check my gauge, and I've got about 10 minutes at most left, and it's at least 20 minutes back down. And I realized that I'm not one of these guys like Anatoly or Mike Groom or Scott Fisher. I can't climb Everest without oxygen. I'm going to be in big trouble up here without gas, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I took this picture of Andy, then Anatoly was badgering me to take a bunch of pictures of him and Andy holding out his Kazakhstan flag, so I did that. And after less than 5 minutes, I turned around and headed down. This is from that same place, just on the summit. As I turned around to go down, I saw Neil Beidelman and Martin Adams coming up. So I said, oh, hell, they'll want a souvenir photo too. So I took my camera out one more time and snapped this picture. And it was only when I looked through the viewfinder that I noticed, whoa, what are all these clouds doing? I mean, we've been looking up the whole time as we're going up, and it's blue sky still overhead. But we turn around to go down, and the valleys are all filled with clouds. At the time, it didn't really register, because this is the day before those convection clouds, no big deal, afternoon clouds, they burn off. So I wasn't thinking, I just wasn't thinking. What this really is the crown, the top of a huge thunderhead, that's even now boiling over the summit of Lhotse, 28,000 feet towards Everest. I'd never seen a thunderhead from 29,000 feet, didn't know what I was seeing. So just none of us, I just blew it off and was worried about my gas. And so this is Andy. He and I got, a couple minutes later, we're back at the top of the Hillary Step. Right here is this crest right here. Right below that, it drops off for 40 feet. So you clip into these ropes and you rappel down this 40-foot vertical section. So I clipped in and moved over the edge to rappel down. I was greeted with an alarming sight. There was about a dozen climbers, more, almost 20 climbers coming up from below, swarming up the ropes. Now, they're not doing anything wrong, they're just climbing the mountain like I did, but there's only one rope on the step, and there's a traffic jam, and I have no choice but to unclip and wait for the parade to pass. And I waited there at the top of the Hillary Step for more than an hour. My oxygen ran out in a matter of minutes, and so for at least an hour, I was there at 29,000 feet, trying not to pass out, trying not to die. I could feel whole sections of my brain shutting down, the brain cells dying, Nothing I could do about it. No one else knew. I didn't tell anyone. This is Neil. Got to the summit, and he's a conscientious guide, and he waited there for almost 2 hours, I think, while the rest of his clients came up. So much for the 2 o'clock turnaround rule. No one really, Neil didn't have a radio, so he didn't know what was going on. It wasn't his job to turn him around, it was Scott's, and Scott wasn't reachable. So eventually the parade passed, and Andy Harris and I started down again. Now this is the south summit. We're looking down on the top of the south summit. I've got my third bottle right there. I've got to get from here to there without gas, and it's all I can do to remain conscious, just standing there. And this isn't hard climbing. But there aren't ropes over much of it. There's no ropes on much of it. And it's 7,000 feet down here, and it's 11,000 feet down the other side. And I can't afford to slip or pass out. And I was really gripped. This, by the way, it's horrible to think about, but this is where Rob Hall spent the final 2 nights of his life, right there, in 150 below zero wind chill at least, 100+ mile-an-hour winds, no shelter, no oxygen, not even a sleeping bag. This is the South Summit. This is the Hillary Step. This is the summit. 3:30, I got my 3rd bottle, put it on my rig, and headed down. Mike Groom and Yasko Namba were right with me. When I turned to go down, there were about 20 climbers strung out behind me on the ridge. This 2 o'clock turnaround time was ignored. Of the 24 people who summited that day, only 6 of us got there before 2 o'clock. Rob Hall himself didn't get to the summit till 3:10. Scott Fisher didn't get there till 3:40. Doug Hansen didn't get there till 4 o'clock. So at 3:30, I left the South Summit. And as I turned to leave, there was Andy Harris, and he'd been acting really weird. The altitude had gotten to him, and he wasn't making sense. He was talking nonsense. Clear danger signs. But I blew it off because I was the client and he was the guide in this situation, and I figured, hell, it's his job to look after me, not vice versa. Violated one of the central rules of climbing. You don't leave your partner, but I did, and it was the last time I saw him. This is Camp 4 right here at the South Col. As soon as I left the South Summit, 3:30, I climbed down into that thunderstorm. It immediately started to snow and blow. By 6 p.m., I was right here, right above camp, and it was a full-blown blizzard, well below zero, 70-knot winds. And I had to get down this steep blue ice, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. Finally, by 7, I was down. And when I got to the tents, I could look back, and there were about a dozen climbers strung out behind me. The first of them was right here, less than 15 minutes behind me. And I figured, well, I made it down. They won't have any problem either. So I dove into my tent. Didn't account for anybody, sort of violated another rule. What I didn't take into account was in the 15 minutes I got to camp, the storm picked up in a huge way, and it went from being just a blizzard to blowing hurricane-strength winds. And 11 climbers got down to here, and they coalesced under the leadership of Neil Beidelman. They're from 2 different expeditions, from Scott's group and Rob's group, including 2 of my teammates, Beck Weathers and Yasko Namba. And Neil didn't know how he was going to get him down this steep ice. So he decided, he did a smart thing. He didn't think he'd get him down safely, so he did an end run way around here. But when he started to come back, it was blowing too hard, and they couldn't see their own feet. And the blowing snow into their faces, because they're facing the wind to get back, felt like a sandblaster. And then they got lost and didn't know where they were and almost walked off the Kangshung face. And Neil realized they were going to die if he didn't. They were going to get hurt. So he sat them down where they were, out on the other side of the col, and they waited for the storm to clear. And they waited all night, and they were out of oxygen by now, growing colder and colder and weaker and weaker. Finally, at 1 a.m., it was still blowing like hell, but the sky overhead cleared enough, so Clev Schoening, one of the clients, and Neil figured out where they were, and they headed back to camp with a couple others who could still walk, but they had to leave behind 5 climbers. 4 of them were too weak to move. Yasko Namba, Beck Weathers from my team, Sandy Pittman and Charlotte Fox from Scott's team, and Tim Madsen, another client from Aspen, who was feeling strong, volunteered to stay with him. So these 5 stayed behind, and Clev and Neil and the others staggered back to camp, the last of their strength, barely alive. And when they got there, Anatoly was waiting for them. Now, Anatoly had come down hours earlier, before anyone else, which was also controversial, but because of that, he was here and he was rested, and he was able to go out into the storm. Now, it's not just that he was rested, it was an incredibly courageous thing for him to do. No one else had either the strength or the courage to do it. Anatoly tried to rouse people, but none of the people he found would go out with him. So he went out alone, and he went out 3 times into the storm, risking his own life, and he brought back Charlotte and Sandy, saved their lives. And Tim came back too. But he thought that Yasko and Beck, they appeared to be dead, so he left them out there. I didn't know any of this till the next morning. I just, blithely dove into my tent and was delirious, sort of didn't have any oxygen that night, so was half conscious all night. And 6 a.m., Stuart, my teammate, shook me and said, "John, something terrible's happened. Beck and Yasko are dead. Scott Fisher's up there above somewhere, and he's dead." Rob Hall spent the night right here at the South Summit, 3,000 feet higher, and now he's calling on the radio. And we turned on the radio, and Rob was saying, "Doug is gone, and Andy's missing." They were with me last night, but they're not with me now. Then he said that he was so cold, he'd survived the night, but he was so cold his legs didn't work, and he couldn't walk, and he needed help. And we were all in shock. We didn't know what to do. None of us could barely crawl, let alone climb the mountain all over again. We thought it's all over. It doesn't have a chance. Now, Ang Dorji had climbed the mountain the day before, too. But he wasn't prepared to leave Rob. He just couldn't do that. He was so dedicated and loyal. So he and another Sherpa named Lakpa Chiri loaded up with oxygen and tea, and on the morning of May 11th, they headed up to try to save Rob. For perspective, it's an unthinkable thing that they've decided to do. It's amazing. It defies belief. For perspective, this is Camp 4, where we all are. The night before, this is where they'd huddled. Neil and Cleb and that group had been trapped out here. And Anatoly had risked his life and made 3 trips from here to here, which in good weather is a 15-minute walk. But it had taken all of Anatoly's considerable strength and skill to do that. It was a monumental, heroic effort for which he deserves the utmost credit. But now, as impressive as that was, Ang Dorji and Lakpa are proposing to climb the whole damn mountain. Rob is up here at 3,000 feet higher. There's no comparison. I mean, this is infinitely harder. But they did it. They set out in worsening weather. And by 3 p.m., they were all the way up here. And then this storm kicked into high gear again, harder than ever. And they almost died, and they had to turn around. They were going to save their own lives. And it was a really horrible moment, because we all knew that pretty much sealed Rob's fate. And we had to call up on the radio and tell him, Rob, Ang Dorji and Lakpa had to turn around. And Rob put on a brave face and said, oh, no big deal. I can spend the night up here. Just send them up again in the morning with some tea, and I'll be fine. And then he was patched through on the satellite phone to New Zealand, where his wife, Jan Arnold, was. She was 7 months pregnant with her first child. And Jan climbed the mountain in '93. She knows what it's like up there. She knows that he might as well be on the moon. It's like Apollo 13. There's no rescue is out of the question now. But they pretended that everything was going to be fine, and they had this wrenching conversation that the whole mountain heard because it was broadcast over the radio. She's telling him, I'll fix you up when you get home, and he's asking if she's comfortable back in New Zealand, and it was awful. And then he said, well, going to bed now, talk to you in the morning. Next morning, we called, and there was no answer. And it was clear what had happened. May 11th, the day after we summited, the group came in and reported that Beck and Jasko were dead. And a search team went out to confirm this when the wind died a little bit. And when they found them, just a short walk across the col, to their horror, they found that both Jasko and Beck were still breathing, could barely detect a pulse, but they were alive, unconscious. And they didn't know what to do, so they came back and we all talked it over. And none of us had the strength to drag them. So it was decided that we had to leave them out there, an act of triage. We all assumed they'd be dead within the hour. 7 hours later, after leaving them out there, Beck Weathers somehow woke up. He was blind to the point where he could only see in one eye about 3 feet. He could focus in 3 feet. He'd lost a glove, so actually both his hands were frozen solid, essentially. Somehow he summoned this incredible will to live, and blind and frozen, he woke up and staggered into camp on his own. He somehow found